And with a look at what stories have been making the headlines this Thursday, it's the ITV News at 10.
Britain, we have a problem. Ministers finally acknowledge the number of people being forced to isolate at home is creating issues with our national food supply.
Food supply is absolutely critical. It's the number one priority for government, and if we judge that we need to take action, and to take action in good time to make sure that the food supply chain is not affected, then we'll take that action.
So that's clear then. Tonight, food distribution workers, though, are among those being told they're exempt from isolation even if pinged. But with more than 1 million others still stuck at home, many are now saying the government just cannot go on like this. Also on News at 10. After our shocking investigation over many months into the dire state of British housing, the minister responsible concedes the pay of some of the executives responsible is out of control. Chaos at the Olympics as the director of the opening ceremony is sacked. They serve the UK and now fear for the fate of the families they left behind, the translators who helped our forces in Afghanistan. The destructive deep-sea fishing right slap bang in marine protection areas around the UK. And give me some latitude. The first full music festival since the pandemic began is underway tonight.
Atmosphere, people,
seeing everyone, it's
hanging
so
out.
good.
Yeah.
We've been best mates for 15 years. We haven't seen each other for a year and a half. It's bringing us back together. It feels really good.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Now, no one is saying tonight there are full-blown food shortages because so many people involved in supplying what we eat are self-isolating. Not at all. But the Environment and Food Secretary, George Eustice, said this evening there is a problem because so many staff in food distribution depots are off work. 15%, he said. As you saw, he promised that if action were needed to take action, to make sure action was taken, then action would be taken. No, but seriously, in the past few minutes, he and the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, have announced that people doing those jobs won't have to self-isolate if they are pinged or phoned by track and trace. Daily tests will be enough for them to carry on working. Pretty clear so far, but in parallel, companies who believe their staff do essential work will be able to apply to the relevant government department for similar exemptions. A bit more of a recipe for confusion, perhaps. And the reason is clear enough. Last week, more than 1 million people were told to stay at home.
Crisis, what crisis? Having spent the day claiming the food supply was robust and resilient, tonight the government admitted there was a problem. Thousands of workers in food depots and some factories will now be exempt from self-isolation, using daily tests instead.
We recognise there are some staff absences in the food supply chain. So what we're announcing is that for the top sort of 400 or so sites, things like supermarket depots and some of the key food manufacturers, we're going to change the system and enable them to test to return to work. So somebody who is contacted in future by test and trace or is pinged will be able to have daily contact testing.
In England alone, the latest figures show that more than 600,000 people were pinged by the NHS COVID app. That's a record high, up 17% in a week. Separately, 428,000 people were contacted and told to self-isolate by test and trace. That's up 27%, a total of more than 1 million notifications in a week. The fact that only one sector is getting a blanket exemption is a sign the government still believes that self-isolation is an important tool in the fight against the virus. But adding to the confusion tonight, it also announced that a few workers in other sectors would be able to skip isolation so long as their employers got a letter from the government. The guidance just released says in the small number of situations where the self-isolation of close contacts would result in serious disruption to critical services, a limited number of named workers may be able to leave self-isolation under specific controls for the purpose of undertaking critical work only. They name 16 potential sectors, including energy, waste, medicines and transport. One sector which isn't included is hospitality. Already hit hard by the pandemic, the pingdemic has meant this restaurant and bar had to close as so many staff were self-isolating.
It's like a game of snakes and ladders. You go up one ladder as things are unlocked and as restrictions are eased, and then you just slide down another snake as you have to deal with these other issues.
Of people being pinged on such a frequent basis?
Absolutely. That's really what's causing us the biggest headache right now.
A headache now removed for those involved in the production and distribution of food, at least. Libby Fina, News at 10, Westminster.
Now, the reason, of course, why so many people are having to self-isolate is because cases of COVID have been rising pretty rapidly in recent weeks. But today, for the third day in a row, there was a drop in the number of positive tests recorded. Do we dare to dream we might soon be able to stop talking about it? The number dipped under 40,000, having been well over 50,000 at the end of last week. And Tom is here to puncture my nice, optimistic bubble.
You can dream, but I'm afraid I'm going to partially shatter them. Yeah, I mean, no,
is there a
cases have been? Yeah, they come down for the first time since early May. The cases are down on the same day they were the week before. That hasn't happened for a long time. It's even brought the weekly average down, which is usually quite a good measure. But we've got to remember these daily testing stats have given us false dawns before, fake summits. You know, they're not to be relied on because they were, in fact, kind of a measure of people's behaviour. Who's coming forward to get testing? And the way you look through that potential fuzz is to look at what's called the positivity rate of the test. What percentage, what proportion of the tests taken are coming back positive for COVID. When we see in the last couple of weeks, the number of tests being done has remained about the same. It's started to fall off slightly, actually, in recent days. But the percentage coming back positive for COVID has continued to rise. What that could be suggesting is that COVID is continuing to increase in the population, but fewer people are coming forward for a test. Now, we don't know why that is. We don't even know if that is in fact the case. But one, it's concerning public health officials, because if that's the case, it means people might not be wanting to test positive, or maybe their symptoms are mild and they don't want to come forward. One reason for that might be we've just been hearing the pingdemic. People are worried about missing work. Maybe they can't afford to miss work. Maybe they're worried about missing a holiday. If that's the case, it's concerning because we need people to test positive and isolate, otherwise the outbreak runs out of control. The only way we'll really know, I think, is really a couple more weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, once we've got the impact of unlocking. We haven't even seen a Freedom Day weekend yet, have we? That's coming up. We saw Latitude Festivals going ahead, things like that. Outbreak could change significantly in days and weeks to come. And the other thing we haven't seen is the impact of schools closing, because that could be quite a positive thing, but we don't know how much yet.
I regret having you on already.
Sorry. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Authoritative as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we have been reporting for 4 months now on the frankly appalling conditions some people live in through no fault of their own. When Daniel, whose investigation this is, asked the Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, today about some of the social housing we've been showing, dripping with water and caked in black mould, he said it was up to councils and housing associations to sort things out. He went further, though. He said executive pay at some housing associations was, to use his words, out of control. He told Dan they should return to the moral mission of their 19th century founders.
They are the frankly unimaginable conditions described as the worst homes in Britain that to date have prompted 5 separate inquiries into how and why families have been forced to live like this. And today, for the first time, we showed what we found to the politician responsible for housing in England.
We was told after Grenfell we were going to have a voice, and we haven't been heard. There's only so much I can get angry and pull my hair out. I just feel like I'm going to kill myself if I continue like that.
How aware were you that this was going on, that people were living like this?
It's frankly shameful that in our country today, people are having to live in those conditions. You've shone a light on some of the worst instances of councils and housing associations' failures. That needs to stop.
Do you take responsibility? Do you feel shame that this is happening right now in the 6th richest economy in the world?
I think it's disgusting that people are living in those conditions.
People watching this will know your government funds councils, and in the last 10 years you've cut their budgets by 38% in real terms. I mean, not seriously saying that the government have nothing to do with this. You fund these councils and they're now struggling to make these repairs.
This is nothing to do with government funding. This is about neglect. This is about a lack of compassion and poor management.
And he was particularly critical of England's biggest housing associations, whose chief executives earn up to £300,000 and £400,000 a year, despite our investigation finding some of their residents living in squalor. Do you think they've got too big? They're paying themselves too much money?
I think executive pay is out of control in some of the housing associations that you've highlighted, absolutely. And I think they need to return to the kind of social and moral mission which is what housing associations and the charities that came before them really originated from.
But the government promised, after the Grenfell fire, big reforms to give tenants more power to raise housing complaints. But 5 years on, the changes set out in the social housing white paper still haven't been passed into law.
I believe that if you live in social housing, you should be treated with exactly the same respect and dignity as if you live in any other type of home.
Secretary of State, that the Grenfell was 5 years ago. You're talking about a white paper that was not in the Queen's speech. We have no date for when it's going to be brought to Parliament. I assume it's somewhere sat in this office on a shelf somewhere.
Well, we're bringing forward probably the most ambitious set of legislative changes to improve the rights of residents of homes for a generation.
And on that, it's a very simple question. When will that happen?
Well, it will be brought to Parliament as soon as possible.
OK, so we haven't got a date for it. We are getting hundreds of emails a week of people living in damp, leaking properties, overcrowded, and they have nowhere else to go. They are trapped. There are 1.1 million people on social housing waiting lists. Last year, this country built just over 6,000 social homes. For every 175 families that need a home, you build them one.
Since 2010, we've built 500,000 affordable homes in this country, and we've built 150,000 homes for social rent. We have secured £11.5 billion to build more affordable homes in the years ahead, and no government is tackling this issue more head-on than we are right now.
One of the things that comes up time and time again in our reporting is that people don't feel like they're listened to. Would you agree to come and meet some residents, some of the residents we've spoken to, in their homes to see for yourself what they've been living through?
Of course, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, I do that all the time. Obviously, COVID has been an unusual period, and I want to ensure that residents of social housing are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve as well.
Daniel Hewitt talking to the Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And if you head over to our website tonight, you can see all of Daniel's reports on Britain's housing crisis. I would really urge you to do so if you didn't see them, because kind of seeing is believing in terms of just how bad it is. Now, no one said it was going to be easy staging the Olympics during a pandemic, and with less than 14 hours to go to the opening ceremony, case numbers in Tokyo have hit a new 6-month high. So the organisers could certainly have done without having to sack the comedian who's been the director of the ceremony. He made a joke about the Holocaust 23 years ago. In the Team GB camp, meanwhile, they are getting ready for the opening parade. 2 flag bearers have been chosen.
They are small-scale and sporadic, but they speak for millions. Opposition to the Games is widespread. Past polls suggest as many as 80% in Japan wanted them cancelled. The most recent revealed 2/3 of the country doesn't trust organisers to contain the spread of COVID-19. It's a sentiment articulated loudest by the country's health professionals, fearing with rising infections hospitals could be overrun.
Volunteers and people will gather from all over this country to Tokyo. And they may bring virus to Tokyo and mix and incubate.
The head of the British team here senses now athletes are arriving, public opinion is softening.
There has been no indication that there's been a nervousness about Great Britain arriving. There's been no indication that they don't want us here. They've embraced us, and as a result, I think our athletes are feeling confident and they're feeling like they belong in Japan, which is really important.
These games will look like nothing before them. Shiny new venues, full only of row after row of empty seats. Upper estimates suggest it will cost up to £25 billion to stage. Ticket sales alone would have recouped £1 billion of that. These games have faced challenges at every turn. Only yesterday, the musical director for the opening ceremony quit. Today, the main director was sacked for comments he made more than 20 years ago. The ceremony itself will be scaled back. There'll be no mass choreography, of course, and it will reflect how the world has lived through the pandemic. Britain's flag bearer in Rio is back again. He admits it's a very different experience, but well worth it.
I think this time round the athletes are a little bit more cautious about spending time with each other and mixing too much. But yeah, it's just still, like, for me, like, it's just special to be part of an Olympic team and be part of the British team.
It is a double honour this time round, falling to Olympic rowing gold medalist Mo Sabihi and another Olympic champion, the sailor Hannah Mills, here on the right.
This Games is going to be unique. There's many kind of strange things about it that are different from before, but I'm carrying the flag for everyone back at home and everyone here and all the athletes.
Tokyo entered its latest state of emergency 10 days ago, yet it is still about to host a giant party. The athletes are invited, but most of the usual guest list has been told to stay well away. Steve Scott, News at 10, Tokyo.
The Olympics isn't the only international sports event curtailed by coronavirus. Australia and New Zealand's rugby league teams, two of the best in the world, both say they don't want to come to England to play in the World Cup in October. Australia are the reigning champions, having won the title in 2017, but they and the Kiwis say they want to protect their players and staff from the worsening COVID situation here. They are asking for the tournament to be postponed until next year. Utterly feeble was pretty much the response from the organisers here. Very different kind of story now and change in tone. And in the dark of a winter's morning 4.5 years ago, 7 people who had taken a tram to work were killed when it came off the rails on a bend. It was going nearly 4 times faster than it should have been. Well, today, an inquest jury decided what happened in Croydon that morning was an accident. The passengers were not unlawfully killed. Their families called the verdict an absolute farce and demanded a new inquest. Their lawyer said justice had been suffocated by the judge's decision not to call the driver and the owners of the tram to give evidence.
It was the worst tram crash in Britain in a century, when this tram travelling at speed round a bend toppled over after spinning off the tracks in South London in November 2016. 7 people died. Today, a jury concluded they weren't unlawfully killed, but died as a result of an accident. Karina's father, Philip Seary, was among the victims. Like other families, she's angry and disappointed.
Let down, heartbroken, devastated, all over again. The driver is the only person that knows why my dad isn't here. I have a 3-year-old daughter that will never meet her grandfather because of this accident.
This reconstruction shows the tram hitting a sharp bend at 73 kilometres per hour in a 20 kilometre per hour zone, almost 4 times the speed limit, causing it to derail and overturn. The accident happened at this junction close to the Sandylands tram stop in Croydon. Crash investigators said it was fast and violent and that passengers were thrown out of the tram. And it was over in just a matter of seconds. Today, the jury concluded the driver lost awareness after becoming disorientated and may have briefly fallen asleep. And they criticised the tram operators for a culture that stopped drivers reporting safety concerns.
For this tragedy, justice has been suffocated, and instead of providing long-awaited answers, the families have been put through more agony. Ultimately, they feel that nobody has been held accountable for their loved ones' deaths.
Both Transport for London, which runs the capital's network, and the tram operators say they've since introduced new safety measures. But families say this is not the end. They are now pressing for a fresh inquest and public inquiry. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
In the 20 years that British troops were in Afghanistan before this summer's pullout, they could not have functioned, of course, without the help of local staff. All were putting their lives in danger by working with, in the eyes of the Taliban, the enemy. Many translators who feared for their lives are making new ones in Britain. But as the Taliban close in on former British strongholds, some have left families behind, and they are now very vulnerable.
Their advance seems unstoppable. Taliban fighters are taking new ground each day in Afghanistan, here seizing the strategically important border crossing with Pakistan. Their black flag now flying once again, leaving many wondering how long before they take the entire country. For Shista Gul, who used to work for the British Army as a gardener, the Taliban's advance is terrifying. One of his sons has already been murdered by them. One of his grandsons has been kidnapped. Now the Taliban is just 3 miles from his home near Lashkar. He fears because everyone locally knows he worked for the British Army, he and his family will be next. One of his sons, who used to be a military interpreter for the British Army, now lives in Coventry. Jamal knows how vicious the Taliban are towards those who worked with NATO. He was shot by them twice and still bears the scars.
OK, so this is where the bullet came in on the side here. That must have been very painful.
It was. Now he exchanges increasingly frantic messages with his father in Helmand.
What do you think will happen if the Taliban take over completely?
If the Taliban come to the city of Lashkar or Helmand, he will definitely get killed. They have threatened him so many times by the telephone that you have helped the British government, your son has helped the British government, we know your son is already in the UK, but we are looking forward to find you. As soon as we find you, you're not going to leave a second in this world.
Jamal was allowed to come here after working with the British Army as part of a scheme which is being widened to help more Afghans, but campaigners say too many are falling through the cracks.
I think Britain has a moral obligation to support those that help them in their mission and intervention in Afghanistan. We've got to be able to stand by our friends and colleagues and ensure that we provide them a home here in the UK, safe and away from the Taliban.
Shista Gul has been told by the British government he won't qualify for priority relocation. So despite the threats and the advance of the Taliban, he and his remaining family in Helmand have no choice but to wait and hope. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
Now, if an area of the sea has been designated as marine protected, you'd think that meant no fishing allowed, right? Well, in fact, it seems to make barely any difference to the activities of certain foreign and indeed British boats. The UK has 372 marine protection areas covering inshore and offshore waters. In total, they protect around 38% of those waters. Sitting right in the middle of the English Channel, the Bassorel sandbank is home to very young lemon, sole, coley and plaice, but it's being threatened by destructive deep-sea fishing. Greenpeace says if such environmental damage was being done on land where everyone could see it, it would be stopped.
Cutting through the waters of the English Channel, speeding towards the border with France. Satellite data shows a trawler working in a marine protected area, and we are heading their way.
Just off our port now.
The French boat is legally catching fish inside the zone. Campaigners are patrolling these seas for the summer, hoping to deter those who cast their nets here. They argue that you cannot call these areas protected while simultaneously allowing trawling of the seabed.
They're just lines on the map and they don't have any kind of restrictions on destructive activity. It's almost a free-for-all within them. We think the government should ban these methods of fishing from marine protected areas without delay.
It happened to be a French vessel this time, but it could easily have been British.
Bonjour, chef. Vous savez...
The skipper chose not to engage with the campaigners, but as they handed him a map of the protected area, so he made a sign saying, "My job is fisherman." All of this was witnessed by an MP.
If the kind of destruction that is happening at sea were happening on land, if you had a bulldozer bulldozing through a nature reserve, people would be up in arms. The trouble is people can't see what's happening out here. They don't have the privilege that I've had to come out today and see it for myself. I think if they did see it, the pressure on government to act far more quickly would be an awful lot higher.
This is what bottom trawling looks like. Opponents want it stopped in protected areas, but fishers believe that's simplistic and that it is both possible to protect the ocean and fish sustainably.
Fishermen have got a bigger investment in marine protection than most people, because if you don't have a functioning ecosystem, you don't have healthy stocks and you don't have anything to catch. So, we understand the need for marine protected areas.
Perhaps because we can't see or touch the seafloor, we're somehow disassociated from it. Yet it's a huge natural resource, and in the case of an MPA, it ought to be protected. But protection, it seems, comes in name only.
We asked the government for evidence that the area we visited has improved as a result of its protected status. They couldn't provide it, but said they are committed to a healthy, sustainable marine environment, flagged up other areas where measures restrict trawling. Whether fishers and campaigners can work together is the catch. Right now, you sense they're drifting apart. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10 in the Channel.
Now, after Monday's lifting of restrictions in England, there was a sign today of outdoor events springing back to some sort of normal. The changing of the guard returned to Windsor Castle. The 300-year-old event was stopped, of course, to keep crowds from gathering. But today, in the summer heat, you wouldn't know the guardsmen of the Household Division hadn't carried out the ceremony for over a year. The crowd was back too. There are no plans yet for the Buckingham Palace version to restart. And changing the guard wasn't the only outdoor musical event starting up again today. One of the big summer music festivals, the Latitude Festival in Sussex, got going this evening with a capacity crowd, enough to make any music fan smile.
Billed as the world's largest camping and music festival since the pandemic lockdown began, these festival goers have been waiting a long time for this.
Atmosphere, people,
seeing everyone, it's
hanging
so
out.
good.
Yeah.
We've been best mates for 15 years. We haven't seen each other for a year and a half. We've seen each other like twice over the past year.
So this festival has provided you with an opportunity to get together?
Exactly. It's bringing us back together and it feels really good. We're going to have a great time.
And are you feeling safe?
Yeah, I think so, because you have to have the double vaccine, and which I've already had mine, so that's good, and the flows every 48 hours.
On site, they're taking precautions. But for the band Fontaines DC, it's sadly over before they even got here. One member's tested positive for COVID, so they've had to cancel their appearance. Tomorrow's headliners Wolf Alice are taking no chances. They're avoiding as much in-person contact as they can ahead of their big moment.
Once we're on stage and you see the crowd, and I don't know, it's going to feel good, I think. So that overrides any nerves for me.
We've been staffed with live music for a long time, and to be the people who are going to be, headlining on that night is a real privilege, and we're absolutely buzzing.
Nick Lithgow understands that feeling. A sound engineer with more than 30 years' experience, no concerts for 18 months has meant he's been working elsewhere until now.
Up until 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was still a school caretaker, potentially not coming back into the industry, which is something we've struggled with. A lot of people have found that, had to find alternative employment.
40,000 people in all are expected to attend, and the festival caterers are grateful.
We did manage to keep kind of relatively busy, keep our kind of heads above water, but the festivals are the bulk of our trade.
As a government test event, Latitude at least had the security of knowing it was going ahead. The industry is calling for an insurance scheme to safeguard its future. And there is no denying the appetite for festivals is definitely there. Starved of live music for so long, when the acts take to the main stage tomorrow, they will find a hungry audience. Nina Nanar, News at 10 at Latitude.
When I said Sussex, I of course meant Suffolk. Just a bit overexcited about the idea of a festival. Good night. Thanks for watching.